Dear ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to each and every one of you to the IndTech2020 conference, Transition to Sustainable Prosperity. Also on behalf of the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research and the European Commission. What needs to change in the industry for it to become more sustainable? What are the current most sustainable innovations? What is the biggest potential? And how can all of that be implemented and still lead us to prosperity? We will be answering these questions and more in the coming hours today. And tomorrow we will be focusing on catalysis for fossil-free fuels and chemicals in Europe at the DECIMA Symposium. My name is Jennifer Sarah-Boone, and it is a great honor to lead you through this conference together with my wonderful co-host, Felix Uhlich, who will be in room 2.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Felix Uhlich, and I will be hosting sessions in room number 2 and in room number 4. And actually, I'm really thrilled to be here with you today, and I am actually really looking forward to the upcoming talks and discussions with policymakers and experts from science and the industry. And it's also my great pleasure to be welcoming participants from more than 45 countries this morning here with us. Wherever you're watching us, at your screens, in your homes, in your kitchens, in your offices, maybe even in the taxi, no matter where you are. Thank you very much for tuning in today and enjoy the hours here with us. Welcome. Back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Felix. And now, without further ado, I would like to hand the word over for the official opening to Director General Research for Technological Sovereignty and Innovation at the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, Professor Dr. Ina Schieferdecker.
Director General PAQUET, Director DRÖLL, representatives of the EU Commission, distinguished participants of the IndTech2020. A virus 1,000 times smaller than a grain of sand shows how fragile our lives can be. The coronavirus brings the fragility of our planet, which we experience every day, through burning forests, rising sea levels, and now through a global pandemic more into focus. Innovations are needed more urgently than ever, especially in times of the corona crisis, but also in order to overcome long-term global challenges such as climate change. Over the past 9 months, people around the world have come to realize how much more our innovative strength is really required. On behalf of the German Federal Minister of Education and Research, Mrs. Anja Karliczek, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our Industrial Technologies 2020 conference. We are very pleased to be able to host this, the 6th IndTech in Mainz, well, to be more precise, in digital space, within the framework of the German EU Council presidency. Under the theme, Transition to Sustainable Prosperity, the IndTech once again offers stakeholders from industry, research and politics the opportunity to gather information and exchange ideas on current and upcoming EU funding activities. You are cordially invited to listen to the contributions of the EU Commission and also to take advantage of our digital networking services. I myself find online exchange far less intense than, say, lively conversations over a cup of coffee. However, I hope that your expectations of this digital event will be fulfilled and that each of you will return home saturated and with new impulses and insights after enjoying the comprehensive program of this conference. In Germany, as in many other countries, There is a saying about sand in the gears. I mean, when an inconspicuous interfering factor, such as a few grains of sand in the gearbox of a machine, causes damage or even system breakdown. Such is the case with the coronavirus, which has caused the course of the whole world to be disrupted. It is exactly this phenomenon with which we are currently being confronted. However, the pandemic is also an opportunity, for example, to establish new event formats such as this one, even though I would have preferred to welcome you in person in Mainz. Around 600 participants from 44 countries are taking part. From a home office in Madrid to a video studio at the BMBF in Berlin to a dining room table with a high chair in Finland, we are all remotely connected today to work on Europe's sustainable prosperity. This is our chance to bring about change through goal-oriented action before the next grain of sand in the gearbox causes damage. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we must not only together here and now overcome the crisis threatening us, we must also at the same time work together to create a better and more sustainable way of life for the world of tomorrow. This requires, today as in the future, excellent research and technological innovation. And that is why we must not suspend research on long-term issues in order to resolve short-term challenges and threats. This is why we, as the current Council Presidency, together with the European Commission and the European Parliament, are continuing to work unvaryingly on the new framework program Horizon Europe. Great expectations rest on Germany. According to the Bloomberg Innovation Index 2020, Germany is currently the most innovative country in the world. We are also the second largest exporter of research-intensive goods. Yet we cannot do this alone. We need a stable and efficient European research area. With Horizon Europe, we have together created a solid framework for collaborative projects to meet the challenges ahead. With Horizon Europe, we have together created a solid framework for collaborative projects to meet the challenges ahead. Horizon Europe will be the largest single funding program for research and innovation in the world. In particular, it will help us to expand our technological sovereignty. The European Innovation Council, the EIC, will fund market-creating innovations. Furthermore, Horizon Europe will introduce for the first time a strategic planning process and missions. The strategic planning process will define the main political and strategic priorities for the first years of Horizon Europe until 2024. The aim is to align strategic priorities in R&D with EU policy priorities. The missions pursue ambitious goals for tackling current social challenges in Europe through interdisciplinary approaches, such as, for example, the creation of 1,000 climate-neutral cities by 2023. Director General Jean-Eric PAQUET will present more about Horizon Europe to you shortly. Before that, allow me to briefly outline the four most important initiatives of the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research on the subject of transition to sustainable prosperity. I would like to start with the overall concept Battery Research Factory from my directorate. Battery technology is a key technology to maintain Europe as an innovative and technological business location and for a large number of various applications. Mastering this technology along the entire value chain and manufacturing battery cells in Europe are important steps towards strengthening the European research area. We are currently in the process of establishing a research facility for battery cell production in Germany. This is an important step towards a technologically sovereign Europe. In addition to the so important technologies for mobility and energy storages of tomorrow, we are working on digital solutions in many industries. Already in 2011, the concept of Industry 4.0 was coined. Today, smart factories have become reality. On the way to resilience and innovative strengths, and especially in view of the COVID-19 crisis, Industry 4.0 is more important than ever. Agility and flexibility in production, enabled by artificial intelligence and highly digitalized network processes, enhanced through AI-based decision support, make our businesses more competitive and resilient. Innovative manufacturing processes are another key to sustainability and competitiveness. However, production processes are not only about manufacturing, but also and especially about recycling. The sooner this idea is widely considered, the sooner we will achieve a genuine circular economy. A true circular economy considers the entire life cycle of products and services. Product design, production processes, extended use through reuse and recycling are all constituent parts. A well-functioning recycling management system combines environmental and climate protection, reduces material costs, and at the same time reduces dependence on raw material imports. The circular economy plays a central role for climate-neutral economic growth in the European Commission's Green Deal. In the research concept, Resource-Efficient Recycling Management, the BMAF is providing a total of €150 million for research and development to transform the economy into a true circular economy. Finally, I would like to say a few words about hydrogen technology as the last example of a thematic highlight of the BMBF. There's hardly any other family of technologies with which we can achieve the claim transition to sustainable prosperity as successfully as with hydrogen technologies. Green hydrogen offers us the opportunity to redesign industry and transport, heat and electricity supply in a climate-friendly way. Germany and the EU are pioneers in the development of technologies for hydrogen production and transport. If we are going to maintain this lead, we can export hydrogen technologies on a large scale throughout the world. Germany and the EU are pulling in the same directions. Germany has launched the National Hydrogen Strategy and under its Council presidency, an R&I initiative to strengthen cooperation between EU member states on this issue. The European Commission has published a European hydrogen strategy as part of its Green Deal. Together, we have the means and the possibilities to achieve our ambitious goal, namely to become the first ever climate-neutral continent in the world. These are just a few examples from my everyday work. I'm sure you can all think of many more examples that will contribute to an innovative and technologically sovereign Europe. This event will also contribute. Let me come to the end. At the beginning, I spoke of sand in the gearbox and that such a grain of sand can upset processes considerably. However, with so many clever minds connected from science and industry, we will be able to manage these grains of sand and make our machines, the socio-technological systems based on these, and ultimately our new approaches to value creation so robust in the future that these grains of sand will be minimized in their harm. Finally, I would like to thank all of the organizers and active contributors for their tremendous commitment in preparing and staging this event, despite the adverse conditions, and all the participants for their interest and time. I now look forward to exciting and fruitful discussions at IndTech 2020. Thank you all and have an interesting conference.
Thank you so much, Professor Schiefferdecker, for your opening and for your welcoming words and for showing us how important innovations are, especially in these times, and that this pandemic can be an opportunity to reach people on a global scale to together find the best way for sustainable innovation. We are very happy that we also have a welcoming speech from the European Commission. It is a huge honor to hand the word over to the Director General for Research and Innovation at the European Commission, Jean-Eric PAQUET.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to open with you the Industrial Technology 2020 conference, together, of course, with our partners and friends from the German presidency. The conference this year is, I find, particularly exciting, even if, of course, we are doing all of that remote and don't have the opportunity to interact and to mingle. Particularly exciting because it takes place, of course, at a key moment for Europe's industry and for the global perspectives of our European industry. We are now dealing with the pandemic still, and are also increasingly preparing across public administrations in Europe, in close coordination and dialogue with industry, the recovery of our economy and the repair of our societies. The Commission has been promoting a recovery and resilience facility agreed by finance ministers, still in discussion with the European Parliament, but very much hope to be able to start deploying these investments into the future in the coming weeks and months. The dialogue is ongoing with you, ongoing also, of course, with member states, which will prepare these recovery and resilience facility plans for implementation as of 21. I very much expect, and that is the Commission vision, that the recovery and resilience should be based on our green and digital transformation. Industry is at the heart of those two transformations. In other words, we don't build back, we build back better, we build into the future, and that I know is also what European industry is looking for strategically. The program today is particularly well designed to support that partnership and discussion. It's very much oriented on the European Green Deal, our growth strategy, and of course therefore at the heart of the recovery and resilience investments. One example of our ongoing efforts, which we are discussing with you, is of course the Green Deal Call, which was launched at the occasion of the Research and Innovation Days a few weeks ago, and very many workshops during the conference will also be an opportunity for you to better understand where we are going with that call for proposals, still under Horizon 2020, but of course also with the very many priorities, actions, partnerships and missions which will be the implementation of Horizon Europe, our future framework program. The European industry is an industry which is embracing today more than ever sustainability. Sustainability, of course, in the ecological sense, and I'm very happy that Madame DRÖLL will speak as well in a moment to give you the perspective from the point of view of the Club of Rome and from her many activities, including also with my teams in DG Research and Innovation. Ecological sustainability, of course also economic and social sustainability, and the work on recovery and resilience, I think, is showing us that you need to bring together these various strands of sustainability, and Europe's industry, I think, is able to do that. You are an industry which is embracing change, you always have, You are neither, in terms of technology, good or bad, or even neutral, but your technology is a technology which needs to promote these European values, be a technology for good. And the Commission very much believes that this green and digital transformation, which you will spearhead, will also allow Europe's industry to be competitive in the coming decades. Now, all this is of course very challenging. We are well aware of that. The recent Commission proposal in the climate law to move to 55% of CO2 reduction by 2030 is a tall order, distinctly feasible. Our impact assessments, I think, demonstrate that. Distinctly feasible but challenging, including for industry. In our homework and analysis, there's a clear indication that for that objective to be met, we will need a major contribution from industry with CO2 reductions of up to 25% as compared to 2015. So here also for you a tall order. Of course, Commission policies, member states obviously, but Commission policies as well want to work in partnership to support industry in that climate reduction path, in that green transformation, which goes of course beyond climate mitigation and abatement measures only. And we will do that of course also with research and innovation, because we believe strongly that research and innovation, and that's very much what you are discussing during the conference, provides not only the knowledge but also the solutions, technology and experimentation in the economy and society needed for these transformations and these CO2 reductions. It takes the form of alliances. Many of you are part of the Batteries Alliance or the Microelectronics Alliance, which are up and running. Investments, of course, also with a strong technology and future research dimension. And we are now setting up the Hydrogen Alliance, which is very much driven also by priorities in member states, particularly from the German presidency. So these are examples where various actors across Europe, across national systems and at EU level, come together to make this difference and drive these transformations. The partnerships in the Horizon Europe, but also the Horizon Europe missions, climate adaptation, oceans, cities, and clean soils, they are all about that green transformation, and our partnerships will also very much be driven by the need to put together our assets in digital, together with the need to be digital leaders, and with that, in many cases, drive that green transformation. So expect a lot of ambition on our side. I know that there's a lot of ambition in the industry. The SPIRE partnership, which we will bring into the future, is, I think, a very good example of that. The Clean Steel partnership in discussion, or the aviation partnerships, are other examples where I can see industry partners very much aligned and ambitious alongside the Commission in these green transformations. That's the agenda for your conference. I would have loved to be there for most of it, because I think it's going to be really insightful, and I hope that you will be able to co-create a number of the measures or the policies which we can then in partnership implement. In fact, what you are doing is 10 years after the Industry 4.0, you will be inventing what my teams and I would like to call Industry 5.0, an industry which is sustainable, human-centered, and which will allow our societies, our children, to thrive also in the future, respecting planetary boundaries or limitations, whilst ensuring our competitiveness and our social model. A lot to ask from industry. Again, we do that in partnership, but I'm sure you will explore all of that in the next couple of days, and I'm looking forward to the results of the conference. Thank you very much.
Jean-Eric PAQUET, many thanks to you as well for your opening remarks and your welcoming words. Next up, I would like to give the word to the co-president of the Club of Rome, Mrs. Sandrine DIXSON-DECLÈVE. She will be digging in a little deeper in the conference's title, Transition to Sustainable Prosperity, in her keynote speech. Which steps are required for a fair transition, and where do the biggest challenges lie? Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to Mrs. Sandrine DIXSON-DECLÈVE.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's such a pleasure to be here. And thank you for the organizers and the German presidency for being so incredibly interested in something that is very close to the Club of Rome's heart and my own. I would like to speak to you today about 50 years of leveraging thought leadership into a real shift for people, planet, and prosperity together. When we talk about prosperity, let's be very clear. Prosperity has to be for people and for the planet. We are inextricably linked to the well-being of our planet, and we cannot disassociate ourselves from that. If you look at the way in which our Club of Rome limits to growth started really looking at the way in which people lived within the planetary boundaries. And you look at the messages that were given this morning, in particular from the ministry, around the fact that that little bit of sand that is actually in the cog, that is making it difficult right now, is something that we have been talking about for a very long time. If you look at this quote, which talks about actually the limits to growth and the fact that this is the greatest issue for generations to come, this quote is not recent. This is not from a recent generation. This was actually a quote in the book, The Limits to Growth, 50 years ago. For 50 years, we have been talking about the fact that we need to live differently within our planetary boundaries, that will actually give us the balance that we need for more people to be prosperous, for our planet to thrive. What we talk about now, and in particular my work, is to look at the convergence of tipping points, because it is these tipping points that are making our lives now so difficult. It is the fact that we need to find a balance between the deep systems crisis of climate change, the deep systems crisis of biodiversity loss, and now, of course, a deep pandemic, which is a zoonotic disease created actually by our encroachment as humanity on the planetary boundaries. This interaction is what is making this crisis so deep, and the need for a very clear systems transformation. It is this interaction that means that we actually need to tap into the consciousness of people today to speak about how we can actually transform and what must we put in place from a policy perspective, as well as from a technological perspective, from a finance perspective, and clearly from an economic perspective. What we created actually already 2 years ago, myself and members of the Club of Rome with the Potsdam Institute, was a plan of action to actually enable us to really take head on the challenge of the convergence of what we've seen at that time, biodiversity and climate change, and now actually the human dimension of the health pandemic. What we clearly indicated is that there were actions that need to be taken in terms of the global commons. There were actions that need to be taken. Sorry, I'm having a bit problem with my slides here. In terms of how we protect our cryosphere, how we protect our Arctic ice sheet, how we protect our forests, those areas that actually are the lungs of the world. That means engaging with those countries that actually hold those global commons, and ensuring that we have the financial resources and the negotiating skills to work with them in order to actually find solutions for them to stop cutting the forests, to actually protect the Siberian permafrost if possible, etc. But it means that we only have a timeline of 10 years, because this is the decade of action. It also means that we need to look at 3 core areas. How do we transform our energy systems? How do we shift fuel subsidies that are very much based on fossil energy into renewables? Trillions of dollars that go continuously into perverse subsidies, not only in terms of fossil energy, but also in terms of agriculture. And I'm sorry to say that the current negotiations on the PAC, or the Common Agricultural Policy in English, has been an absolute disaster, because it has shown that there's a disconnect between member states and the push by the European Commission to truly transform into a farm-to-fork policy that looks at biodiversity in the way in which we use land use for people, not just in terms of intensive agricultural needs. But this also demonstrates the tensions. It shows the tensions within the transformation. And hence why we need, when we look at fossil energy and the key shifts, when we look at regenerative and circularity in terms of the key shifts, we have to bring in the human dimension. We have to figure out ways to bring people on the journey, to look at the taxation policies, the fiscal policies to enable us to do that. This was our plan of action for transformation. But clearly, when we look at that plan of action, and many businesses are saying to us, but you're absolutely crazy. We cannot put in place those targets and those timetables in the next 10 years. We have taken from a scientific perspective the clear issues that we see before us. The fact that actually we will probably be at 1.5 degrees by 2030. We've already passed the Paris Agreement, people. The fact is we cannot build back better everything. We cannot build back our glaciers. We cannot build back some of our forests. So we are in an emergency. But that emergency does mean that we also can potentially emerge if we act fast. So what we've been saying clearly to those that we're hoping will listen, and in particular our recommendations to the European Commission and others, has been that the COVID crisis and this convergence of tipping points demonstrates that people can transform. It demonstrates that this is the moment to seize the opportunity for designing the system that will get us out of this mess and create the resilience that we need. That in order to truly respond to the crisis, we need innovation not just in technology. We need innovation in governance. We need innovation in systems change. We need top-down, bottom-up innovation. And we need to bring everything together into a sense of solidarity and collaboration, which will mean radical collaboration. The COVID-19 exit truly does give us an opportunity to bring into check the European Green Deal, the climate objectives that we have, the Sustainable Development Goals, and work together towards a transition that very much brings in all the different actors. But we have to come back to that action plan, which is that we have to invest in renewable energy and shift from fossil energy. We have to invest in nature and reforestation. We have to invest in food systems and regenerative agriculture, not old, intensive agricultural practices that are reaping the land that is enabling people to actually be more prosperous. We have to focus on local, circular, and a different type of low carbon economy. People, planet, and prosperity have to be at the center of the transition. Oh, it's not working. Here we go. Okay. Sorry, just a little bit of a glitch here in terms of the slides. What we've done with the European Commission's DG Research and Innovation has been to look at the economic and societal implications of the shift towards innovation and research. What are those economic and societal implications? And how can, within the convergence of the tipping points in this pandemic, how can we protect people and planet and ensure that we become more prosperous? How can we prepare for the next crises? And how do we transform the society and economy in order to ensure that we actually can all properly live on this planet that we call home? That will entail the need for design. And that is exactly why the European Green Deal is so important. If we are able to look at the way in which these policies integrate, interact, work together, and optimize using digitalization and other types of technologies to ensure that we can do that, this can be the transformative vision for Europe. What it means, though, is that we need to be smart. We need to figure out what is our guiding light, hence the compass that we have put together with systemic. we need to then think about what are those key economic ecosystems that we need to unpack. And then we need to think about what are those innovation champions? Where should we be placing our money in terms of technology? And when we're talking about champions again, let's think about what are the processes? What are the ways in which we can enhance the relationships between different actors to optimize the proper partnerships for action? This also means that we need to remember what the guiding light is. And I apologize, I don't think this looks very good on your screen, but the fact of the matter is the number one principle for this compass and for the European Green Deal should be moving away from growth at all costs to a fair and prosperous society. That is the number one objective. And that reflects exactly what the President of the European Commission said in her State of the Union address. Having worked with the President's team, it is clear that she has understood that for Europe today, it is the European Green Deal that is our North Star. It is the way in which we look at designing rather than be forced by diktat or by chaos to try to react. It is the way in which we protect this fragile environment that we call home. These are the key highlights of her State of the Union address, indicating very clearly that we need to work and move from a wealth-dominated push and a growth-dominated push to well-being. That is what Kate Raworth indicated very quickly and clearly when she started to put in place donut economics. Member of the Club of Rome, Kate Raworth, economist, has indicated that we can actually design, we can create a donut type of approach where we look at the planetary boundaries and we look at our existence within the planetary boundaries to ensure that we thrive within the planet by using natural resources in a much more holistic way, by trying to create an interaction with our world that does not totally reap the benefits, but instead pour back into this land that we call our home. A very important point, because now the donut economics is not only being put forward as a theory, but it's being applied. And it's being actually applied alongside what we call well-being economics. Donut economics at the local level is already permeating into a variety of different cities: Amsterdam, recently Brussels, Seattle, Vancouver, and many more that have signed up. Well-being economics that looks at the three core areas of transformation, which I already mentioned: the link between the social, the economic, and the environmental. The way in which we can put in place new indicators to growth to enable greater prosperity and well-being for people who live within a country, within a region, within a city. We have many governments that are now picking up the well-being economic thinking and integrating that into their economic models and are coming out of COVID much more resilient. Iceland, Scotland, Wales, New Zealand, and many others. So what does this mean? What does this mean for us? Where are the tensions? And I hope that Pierre Joris, who is the next speaker, will very much pack up and look at the tensions which are happening also within the transformative space of technology solutions. But what I want to say to you is that I firmly believe that we can actually start this journey, this transformative journey where people are already understanding what is the most essential as they come out of COVID. We have the European Green Deal. We actually now have the Chinese who are indicating that they will also go climate neutral by 2060. We have high ambition countries, both on biodiversity and also on climate. We have more and more support for nature-based solutions. Companies that are coming together and indicating that substitution of fossil energy chemicals and fibers needs to happen as soon as possible. The business landscape is building on the Paris collaboration. We have seen that coming out of COVID, it is those companies that actually have environmental, social, and governance principles integrated in their full value chain that are coming out more resilient. And we're seeing that there is continuous support for more sustainable finance through the taxonomy and other procedures, whether it be disclosure, and also the way in which we look at our balance sheets. Civil society is clearly telling us and reminding us that we need to go fast. This transformation will not necessarily be easy, but we cannot sell it as a doomsday scenario. It is the vision of the future. It is our mission. And this mission is not to go to the moon. The mission is to preserve the earth that we have and our well-being within that earth. So it is clear that we must listen to that civil society call, and in particular, the calls of the youth, who have clearly indicated to us that we cannot scrap away their future. But my last call to you is, this is not just about the next generation, because the impacts of climate change and COVID and biodiversity loss are hitting us now. So transformation is no longer a want to, it is a have to for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sandrine DIXSON-DECLÈVE. We need balance, we need to be smart, and we need to take action now. We will be seeing you in just a moment again later for our panel discussion, as well as our next speaker, who I would like to warmly welcome. Pierre JORIS is the President of A.SPIRE and member of the Supervisory Board Domo Chemicals, and he will be talking about the transition to sustainable prosperity. Pierre JORIS.
Do you see me? Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for this introduction. I'd like also to thank the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research, and of course the European Commission, for inviting me to this distinguished event and giving me a chance on behalf of the process industry to really express my view, our view on these very important topics of sustainable prosperity, or rather transition to sustainable prosperity. And this is quite a title indeed, and I do my best in the next 15 minutes to give you my perspective of, first of all, what I understand under these words, what I think are the major steps that need to be taken, at least from an industrial perspective, and more practically what we as process industries are really proposing as practical actions in this regard. But without further waiting, let me start with the first slide. So it's clear observation to everyone that the way our society and economy is running is not sustainable today. Obviously, we have the climate change issue. There is clear consensus of the impact of human activities of this climate change, which, if unchecked, will pose, of course, substantial environmental and economic threats, as illustrated by this slide, that will increase the social fracture. We have the issue of resource consumption that is increasing exponentially, that will create serious issues of resource depletion if we don't take care. We have also the challenge of waste generation, which is also rising continuously. And if it is not properly managed, will certainly and is already creating very serious issues to our ecosystem. So there is one clear conclusion, is that the status quo is not an option. So how do we move from there? We need a drastic change, but what are the options? Well, some would advocate for a negative growth option. So coming back to the situation as it was before, and I'm sorry, the slide is not changing. Okay, so coming back to situation, pre-industrial situation. Now, obviously, this might be a solution for the environmental impact, but it would certainly have profound economic implications. It would certainly dent profoundly our standard of living, and most probably, let's face it, run into a social crisis. We have the other options on the other way, which is really to trust and leverage the human creativity and the genius of human being to disruptively change our production methods and business models, as well as consumer habits. so that we can, on one side, address decisively these environmental challenges, but on the other side, also maintain sufficient economic activity, employment, and well-being, as Sandrine mentioned. So in a few words, we would create a society, and I use the words of Professor Tim Jackson, where people everywhere have the capability to flourish as human beings within the ecological and resource constraint of a finite planet. And this is really my vision of sustainable prosperity, and obviously, as you have understood, the way I would advocate. Now, this is nice words, but how do we get there? Well, there is a good news that at least we see paths to get there. There has been several analyses by different companies, different organizations. And by the way, I'm happy that when we outline the solutions here, it's pretty much aligned with what Sandrine mentioned, but we have really 5 key areas where we have to work on. Certainly, redefining the food and forestry is one big topic. Electrifying the society will be an important step. Certainly, we see it on mobility, but in a few minutes, I will talk about the electrification of the industry. The new circular economic model is an obvious need as well. Of course, the energy and the fuel needs to be decarbonized. So I insist not only the electrical energy, but the fuels as well. And then last but not least, the carbon capture and use or sequestration. We will not get there without putting also emphasis on that. So this is nice on paper, but this will mean when you look at the math will be daunting. And when you look at the implication, it means really major shifts that are required. So to get there, what are the steps that we need to put in place? And if you allow me, I will now more concentrate on the process industries, which I do represent here. It is, in my mind, crucial that the process industries are in this pattern of reaching the transition to sustainable prosperity. So why is that so? Well, first of all, because our process industries are obviously big contributors to the emission, to the resource consumption, and to the waste generation. So we have to fix it. But the two more important message that I want to pass here is that these process industries are really at the roots of all the value chains in Europe. Our product, the material that are produced by the different process industries are key to generate the green energy solutions that we need in the future. They are key to produce these high performance batteries that we need for the medical equipment or the medical system that we need for the health of the population. And certainly they are very important also for the digitalizations, for the electronic device communication tools, etc. So it is crucial that we can have these process industries in our continent to nurture these different important technologies. But the second important message also, our process industries, we know it, are consuming very large amount of resources. They are consuming very large amount of energy. But we can turn this to an opportunity because it means that our industries have also the capability of consuming very large amount of green energy, of green hydrogen, of secondary resources. So it is a formidable way, let's say, to enable the scale-up of the technologies needed in these areas of green hydrogen, of secondary resources. So these very powerful industries are really key neighbors to succeed in this transition, in my mind. So what do we need to make our industries really sustainable and reach these objectives of climate neutrality of circular economy? Well, on the left-hand side of this slide, you see a number of key levers that are well known. I will not go into detail, but you recognize electrification of our industry is a key point, electrifying the furnaces, but also the processes. The use of alternative fuels is, of course, a key element. So the decarbonization of these fuels using either waste or biomass, but also hydrogen will be a key player in this field. Carbon capture, of course, the upcycling technologies, and the digitalization. So we feel that we have a very good toolbox to succeed. The issue is that there are a number of barriers, and we need to very well understand these barriers so that we can take the proper actions to facilitate and accelerate this transition. Well, one of the barriers, of course, is a technological gap. Even though we see the technologies that can be used, most of these technologies are still far away from being demonstrable at industrial scales. So we need really a very quick scale up of these technologies, both from a technological standpoint, but also economical standpoint. So this is one key point that we need to address. Second one, well, we will need massive investment. There will be a slide later in the presentation, but a very big investment, a huge investment needed in the decades to come, which is an issue in itself, not so much because of the access to capital, but because of the uncertain return of these investment as of today. A third one, which is related to the second one, is the intrinsic higher cost of all the decarbonization technology that we have to put in place. I don't want to make a course of physics or chemistry here, but by definition, we will have to use much more energy if we don't use the energy that has been stored for millions of years in the fossil fuels. So it will lead to higher costs, and we need to pay attention in a matter of competitiveness on the global scene. Affordability and acceptability by the consumers will be a point. We've been quite disappointed in the past decades about the little success that the bio-based solutions have met on the market, for example. And last but not least, we have to recognize that within the different companies, there is also a continuous concern about how the investors are reacting. As you know, investors have a tendency to be focused on short-term profitability. So how can we make sure the investors will also take the long-term viability and resilience into account? So these are the main barriers. So how can we face those? Now, we see, if we try to summarize, really 4 areas where actions are needed. And I will start with the first, which addressed the first issue, which is the quick scale-up of the technologies that are needed. We really need to support innovation in these next decade. You know, the investment cycles are long in our industries, so we need to be ready by 2030 with the technologies at industrial scale so that we can start really the rolling out of the investment. So we need a good system to support innovation, and I think there are 3 characteristics. Of course, I mean, funding needs to be there to de-risk the investment. These technological investments have a high risk, first from a technology standpoint, because there is still a large number of unknowns, but also from a market uptake standpoint. A very important point, the coordination between the different stakeholders is really key. We don't have much time to lose, so we need to bundle resources. We need to make sure that all the different actors share the priorities. We decide very well on which technology to focus. So I certainly mean about coordination between the different industrial sectors, but also coordination, for example, between member states and European Commission in the way the money is funneled into the funding of innovation. And a third area, I mean, globally speaking, we will need a step up in our R&D investment, whether it's at public level or at company level. The industry has also to look in its own yard. So that's the first area of actions needed. A second important area is the right framework conditions. We need to have a framework condition that really incentivize the investment in decarbonation and circular economy. It means certainly, and I think it is well known, strategies that include carbon pricing, that is clear. We need, and we will need, a number of measures that accelerate the market uptake. As I mentioned, there are big questions on whether or not the market will, in fact, uptake these new technologies, these new products. So anything like going from public procurement or establishing standards or labeling will certainly be key in incentivizing the consumers to go into the right directions. Protecting global competitiveness is a key point. As I mentioned, cost will be higher. We need to protect against other areas or against the traditional technologies that will still be there for a moment. So there will be a number of mechanisms, whether it's carbon border tax or contract for difference. This is not the place to discuss in details, but there needs to be a very strong point of attention on this. And finally, the transparency towards investors. Clearly, the new taxonomy goes very well into that direction, making sure that the investors see very clearly which company are going into the right direction in terms of sustainability and which company will certainly have a higher resilience versus the short profit that they can show. So that's the second main point. Now, a third point is about the infrastructure. Without going into too many details, it is obvious that to succeed in the transition, our industries will need green energy for sure, but much more green energy than today because of the electrification, because of the need to use CO2, because of the need to produce green hydrogen. So there is a very important need to invest in green energy infrastructure in the future. Same thing for green hydrogen. That will be a key point in the transition. Hydrogen will be key as an alternative fuel, but it will be key also to rebuild building blocks with CO2. Infrastructure in CO2 as well. CO2 will have to be transferred from emitters to companies who are able to reuse CO2. So the investment in these infrastructures will be a key enabler for the future. So you are talking about massive investment and massive infrastructure investment where probably the public side will have also to play its role. And lastly, and very importantly for the title of the presentation today, the social aspects. It is clear that in transitioning to these new models, it will not be harmless. We can already imagine that some areas will be much more aggressively impacted. I'm talking about geographical area. For example, some plants that do not have access to these infrastructure may not survive. So it will certainly be important also to have appropriate redistribution tools so that these individuals, these communities that are most aggressively affected are properly supported. There will be also a very big change in skills needed. We are talking today about new technologies, new business model, urban industrial symbiosis, things that do not exist today and will require a lot of new skills. So there is an effort to be made in developing those new skills, but also in reskilling a workforce that will have been used to more traditional technologies. So clearly, there needs to be a fair and inclusive transition that accompany these technological transitions. So these are the four main areas where, from a very high-level standpoint, we need really steps to be taken. Now, what are we proposing practically today? And now I'm coming back to what we as industry would like to put in place. And my first message first is that today the industry is really ready to move. I wouldn't have said the same 8 years ago. I remember very well I was in this same position making a plenary presentation at Aarhus in 2012 for industrial technologies. We were talking at that time of resource efficiency, energy efficiency. Clearly, the clock has moved and the industry now realizes the urgency to go to a much more disruptive way. And you can see, you have seen already many companies expressing support to the Green Deal. Recently, there has been this more than 30 CEOs of companies supporting clearly the Green Deal and announcing CO2 targets for the future. You see a few logos that are companies from our association, but there are many more of this. So the time is right. What we are proposing is to set a new partnership with the European Commission that is called Process for Planet. Our purpose is really to build the innovation agenda so that we can be ready to provide to the industry these technological solutions that will allow them to roll out the investment and be ready for 2050. Now, the first aspect of this partnership, and I insisted before, is the coordination, the collaboration. For us, it is key. So the partnership brings together 10 industrial sectors in the process industries that share basically the same concerns, but we bring also RTOs, we bring also academia, we have a few NGOs in our association, and in the structure of the partnership, we want to have impact panel, to have also consultation panel where we can associate, for example, the financing community so that we can make sure that the financial tool will be well coordinated in the future. Our aim is clearly, as I mentioned, to build this technological agenda so that we can become climate neutral, circular, that is reach near zero landfilling as well as water discharge, and keep competitive. So keep the competitiveness during the transition, but also become leader in mastering these green technologies. So becoming regaining leadership globally in this new green economy. So the core of our partnership is, as I mentioned, this technological roadmap. So we have designed 36 innovation program that we would like to implement in the next 7 years. I will not bother you with details, but I am showing you this slide to indicate the different innovation areas. And in green, you have the innovation area that are really of interest for all these different industrial sectors, hence the importance of having a good coordination. Now, it's not only about technology, as Sandrine mentioned. We think that and we are convinced that our partnership needs also to look at the non-technological aspect, certainly the skills, well identify those skills that will be needed for the transition, but we want also to have a very good critical analysis of the potential competitive gaps so that we can make good recommendation for a revisited framework or new standards that will support the uptake of these technologies. We don't want only, even though this partnership will be Horizon Europe, we also look further. We want to have an impact. So we want to show that these different technologies can really be implemented at industrial scales. So to do that, we have in our roadmap listed 50 what we call first-of-a-kind plans. So we have a list of 50 first-of-a-kind plans where we say as industry, look, we are ready to invest in these first-of-a-kind plans. These plans will combine a number of the innovation technology that will have been developed. If the right conditions are there, we are ready to invest and show that indeed it is feasible at industrial scales and it is feasible economically speaking. A second initiative is what we call the Hub for Circularity. We are also convinced that this is where it will happen. So what we understand by Hub for Circularity is really cluster of industries in the same geographical area and working together with the local territory to optimize the flow of their products, of their waste, of their energy. And we are convinced that this is the way to really achieve quicker, certainly circular economy model, but also carbon neutrality. So we are big advocate for these structures. We will not as partnership create the Hub for Circularity, but we want to support them by building communities of practice, of course, providing the right innovative technologies needed to succeed. So this is in a nutshell what this new partnership will be about and our practical proposals to really make progress in this sustainable transition. Now, I will finish with this slide, which gives a few elements about the investment that will be needed. I mentioned before that our industry will have to face massive investment, but first, let's look at the innovation part. We have made an estimation of how much it will take to bring these different technologies at industrial scales in the next decades. And you see on this graph, the amount in billion euros that will be needed across the different TRL level and across the different years. You see here, the first square is really what is under Horizon Europe. It's about 10 billion euro that needs to be invested by the different actors, let's say until 2030. The second step is really building these industrial demonstrators. And here we estimate that over the next few decades until 2050, we have about 19 billion euro to be invested, a big part already before 2030, as you see, and a major part also in the next decade. And finally, you have the rollout investment. We are not talking anymore about innovation there, but just investing and rolling out across Europe. And there, it's difficult to have a correct estimate, but we are certainly talking beyond trillions. So as you see, and I mentioned, particularly on the innovation part, these investments are quite risky. We need certainly some support, some help to de-risk at different levels. We have the very nice tool of Horizon Europe to help us up to TRL 7.8. We have also seen very interesting initiative like Innovation Fund to help in the industrial scale demonstrators. We have now, and we see with the Green Deal, and the New Generation Fund, hopefully tools also for supporting the rolling out. So it is really key to have these comprehensive toolbox of funding and financing tools, but these needs to be very well coordinated. And that's one of the message we have. So when we talk about coordination, certainly coordination between European level and between member states, so because we shouldn't spoil our results there, but also coordination in the substance of these funding. It's very important that they are coherent, that what is really priorities at the first level of Horizon Europe receive also priorities in the scaling up funding, and same thing for the rolling out. So we hope, and we are determined to have a role in helping the different public authorities to build that coherence in the pipeline of funding. So I will finish by this slide, since I was asked to give my opinion about what I think are the main challenges for the different stakeholders. And there are a number of challenges. Some of them have already been mentioned. When we look at the EU policy standpoint, I mentioned already the need, I think, for a very strong framework conditions and for the coordinated funding. We certainly need also, I think, in terms of EU policy, to be bolder in a level playing field with certain areas. And I think we will discuss more about this in the next panel about technological sovereignty. And of course, there is a big challenge of just transition and fair burden sharing that I mentioned from a social standpoint. On our industrial level, of course, the main challenge we see is certainly first financial, the massive investment that I have touched, but also the existential transformation that some of our companies, well, all of our companies will have to go through. When I mean existential transformation, you have to realize that we are really talking about rebuilding not only our plans, but also our business models, rebuilding the workforce. So this is really key, and we know that some of the companies will not survive, and this is why I'm talking about existential, but that's life. And certainly competitiveness, that's the key issue that we need to be very careful and handle it very appropriately during the whole transition until, let's say, the global world has been at par with us. In terms of academia, a number of challenges as well. New skills have to be developed, new curricula will have to be developed. It's very key to do it soon enough to have the right workforce to support the transition. I think the coordination with industry, which is already quite good, I think, but will need to continue and to be reinforced, again, to make sure we have the right priorities, to make sure also that in academia we work on in the upstream on the right topic as well for the future. And in terms of society, I see also a number of key points. Clearly, there will be a need for education, for educating more the people around sustainability. Every one of us will have to change the consuming habits and their lifestyle. And I think everything can be summarized by the fact that in our society, basically, we will have also to change our values. So I will stop with that, and we'll be happy to answer any question you may have after the panel. Thank you very much.
Pierre JORIS, thank you very much for your inspiring and motivating presentation, and of course also that you will be deep diving into our topic in our panel discussion. Our economy and society is constantly facing technological innovations, bringing continuous change. How do you drive technology in line with societal values, protecting the self-determination of citizens in this digital world? And what are the key requirements for the innovation policy? Please give a very warm welcome to Peter DRÖLL, the Director of the Directorate General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission. He will be leading our panel discussion, Europe's Technological Sovereignty, with all of our previous speakers. Peter DRÖLL.
Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome to all of you also from my side. technological sovereignty, that's quite a bulky concept. And this is what we will be discussing in this panel now. It was in 2017, in his famous speech at Sorbonne, when the French President Macron launched his initiative about Europe. And he structured his speech about 6 keys to sovereignty, including digital and industrial power. Sovereignty is about control over territory, resources, and people. Linking it to the European Union is quite a courageous step and has been quite new, because sovereignty usually is associated with nation states. But here we are. This term of European sovereignty and European technological sovereignty has found its way into policy. And it was just earlier this month, in October, at a special summit of our heads of states and government, where there were a clear message passed in the conclusions, and I would like to share that with you here. Because the heads of states and government said the EU must pursue an ambitious European industrial policy to make its industry more sustainable, more green, more competitive globally, and more resilient. And one of the elements to achieve this objective, more green, more sustainable, more competitive, was that the heads of state invited the Commission to identify strategic dependencies, particularly in the most sensitive industrial ecosystems, and to propose measures to reduce these dependencies, including by diversifying production and supply chains, as well as fostering production and investment in Europe. But absence of sovereignty means dependency. So our discussion now is more than timely. And we have seen this context set by our heads of states for our, which is very timely for our panel. The panelists, you have heard them this morning in their keynotes and the opening. We have exactly the right people from the German presidency, from the European Commission, from the Club of Rome, the thinkers, and from industry. So I will start with a couple of questions to them and would ask you also to put your questions in the chat function so that we can share these questions then with the panels. My first question is the same to all 4 of the panelists. And it is, what does technological sovereignty mean for you? Is it, as some claim, the futile and dangerous attempt to roll back globalization? What does it mean for you? Let's start with Professor Schieferdecker. Ina, the floor is yours.
Peter, thank you very much. We like to shape sovereignty indeed a little different to be the fundament for sustainable prosperity. And we understand technological sovereignty to mean the ambition and ability to jointly and cooperatively shape key technology and technology-based innovations. This includes the ability for Europe to act independently if and when necessary. So technological sovereignty comprises the formulation of the requirements to be placed on technologies, products, and services in line with our own values, and having a say in the definition of relevant standards for global markets. This explicitly does not mean shutting ourselves off from international cooperation, but practicing cooperation of an equal footing. This one, okay, thanks. So consider digital technologies. We want to ensure that they are secure, comply with central data regulations, and also with respect to sustainability, that they use as little energy and resources as possible. This requires a fundamental understanding of the core technologies, the ability to develop and produce adequate technologies, and where they do not yet even exist. It does not necessarily mean that we need to do everything on our own, and we shouldn't, because referring to the second part of your question, to roll back globalization, this would indeed be a very narrow perspective. We benefit from globalization, and the main reason for that is the quality and innovativeness of our products and services. To maintain this position, we must keep innovating and improving technologies. In addition, international cooperation is also necessary to stay innovative. We benefit from innovations and ideas from other parts of the whole world, and complex challenges, as outlined before in all the speeches, requires really joint forces and a new way of thinking, approaching, and resolving these challenges. So technological sovereignty and international cooperation are just two sides of the same coin and not opposite. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's immediately continue. Sandrine, what is technological sovereignty for you?
I couldn't agree I couldn't agree more, actually, with the description that we've just received. And I would say that let's make sure that we talk about technological sovereignty and solidarity. If we link the two, then I think we have what we absolutely need for this Industrial Revolution 5.0 that Jean-Eric PAQUET was talking about, which is that we absolutely need to ensure, first of all, that our value chains will not be disrupted as we move through future crises. We have seen through COVID that our dependency, actually, on technology coming from other countries has not, and materials, by the way, not just technology itself, has actually created some real constraints for Europe. We need to ensure that we have a technological market that is competitive within Europe. But when I say competitive, I mean also taking into consideration the environmental and social principles that we were talking about, so that we think about technology for people and planet, that we don't just talk about competition. We are lucky, and ASPIRE clearly demonstrates to us, and Pierre Joris, I'm sure, will come in here, to have the most advanced companies in the area of cement, in the area of steel, in the area of aluminium, who have both been able to continue to produce for people and reduce their impact on the planet. Many of these companies have actually been able to put in place AI and digitalization and still hire people and still continue to remain competitive. That is the vision of where we want innovation to be, where we are able to remain competitive, work with clearly other value chains and other technology suppliers from outside Europe, but ensure that we are resilient within Europe and showing the leadership that demonstrates the people, planet, and prosperity approach.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandrine. Pierre, you also agree? How does it sound for you? What is technological sovereignty for you?
Yes, Peter, certainly I agree with what has been said. And clearly, to come back to your detailed question, it should certainly be an attempt to roll back globalization for clear. I think we have certainly realized in the recent years, and it has been said already, that many strategic sectors are really increasingly reliant on third country components or technological platform or even raw materials. And we have even some critical national infrastructure that are completely built outside of Europe. So it becomes really crucial that this dependence can be fixed, particularly in those times where we can see that competition in technology has become fiercer, and you see other areas of the world, and talking about United States and China, not to mention, that really show their intention to ensure their technological supremacy, including, by the way, by supporting their homegrown industry. So we need to react. And for me, first and foremost, technological sovereignty is about making sure that Europe can really develop, master, and protect its own technological capabilities and destiny in all those strategic fields, and strategic fields that either are vital for the security and autonomy of Europe, and of course for the resilience of its economy, like we have seen in the recent crisis, or that can contribute to shaping the future in a critical way, which is particularly true, for example, for the green technology that we've been talking about. So for me, technological sovereignty it's really more about setting the necessary conditions to strengthen Europe's industrial and technological capacities and enhance their innovation potential in those strategic areas well identified. Now, beyond this positive view, proactive view, I think we shouldn't be naive, and to me, I see also in technological sovereignty the need to be bold in protecting such access to strategic technologies. So it means, for example, being able to regulate the firms that have or would threaten to have a monopoly position in exploiting these strategic technologies, protect its own strategic capabilities. So think about cybersecurity, for example. And also, I mentioned it already before, be bolder in our cooperation with countries or regions that do not share the same values or build protectionism. So I'm for it, and we need cooperation with the rest of the world, but we need to be bold in making sure that our standards are applied. So these arsenal of tools of IP protection, antitrust, foreign direct investment screening are very important. Now, I would like to mention also a third point, and it addresses also the second part of your question, and indeed repeat that we should resist the temptation to hide under technological sovereignty a kind of hidden protectionism. This should certainly not be the case. And clearly, if we become inward-looking, if we start building even hidden trade barriers, like if we are tempted, for example, to force the establishment of uncompetitive regional player, for example, it would not help anyone. And it could even be extremely harmful for Europe for two reasons. First of all, because our European businesses are very highly incorporated in global value chains, so we could certainly suffer from a retaliation, but also because it has been said, we cannot do everything in Europe. We still have to rely on good, safe, innovative products from the rest of the world, particularly in those areas that would not be, in the field that would not be considered as strategic. And so securing that we have access at competitive cost to these products and services is really also key, and we need to make sure that we do not harm that possibility.
Thanks, Pierre. Very clear. No protectionism. I think that was clear from all interventions. Jean-Eric, from your perspective, what does it mean, technological sovereignty?
Yes, Peter. I mean, firstly, I find a remarkable consensus already in your panel around technological sovereignty, and clearly for the European Union, this is not about putting into question a multilateral value-based system, which I think has served the world and Europe very well the last decades, including on the front of poverty alleviation. I think we cannot, we certainly don't want to lose that. At the same time, the pandemic is a spectacular wake-up call, and indeed our dependence on a number of key strategic value chains has been illustrated amply during the pandemic on pharmaceuticals or protective equipment. And this is, I think, very much where we now need to reflect how we can ensure that our industries and our economies collectively in Europe receive the necessary attention, and I would argue the necessary investments to ensure that we develop more of that sovereignty as we move forward. So it's very much linked to the investment agenda. And as Sandrine argued, and Pierre also, for me, this should very much be also linked to the transformation agenda. I think we should invest strategically where we transform, and as we do that, become strategically more resilient, if you want. That's for me what strategic and technological sovereignty would be about. There are many ingredients. It's not an easy recipe, but I think we are now in October 2020 in a very different place as compared to a year ago. And indeed, a broad consensus emerging between leaders, between institutions, and we will certainly be able to invest collectively into it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jean-Eric, and thank you all. As you said, Jean-Eric, there is a clear consensus here in this panel. It is about being able to act on equal footing and develop, protect, and master our technologies. It is not against international cooperation. It is about cooperation. And I have found two interesting connections. Sandrine, you made the connection with solidarity. That is something quite new, I think, in relation to technological sovereignty, but very important, and it resonates with the investment link and the innovation link. Thanks a lot. I think we have quite a good understanding about this quite difficult notion, but explained as it is here from our panelists, it is a very good way forward. So let's now look at what this means for the cooperation between the EU and member states and the EU. And I start with Ina and Jean-Eric. Ina, if it's all about European cooperation to face global challenges, what is there left as role for member states?
Thank you, Peter. Indeed, to us, research and innovation policy is at the heart of strengthening technological sovereignty. And indeed, only a holistic approach which combines research transfer, standardization, maybe certification, and establishing and developing necessary infrastructures together with strengthening skills and competencies and cooperation with others will get us there. So in the coming years, Germany now will invest billions in technologies like artificial intelligence, battery research, clean hydrogen, sustainable manufacturing, quantum technologies, communication systems, and others, including circular economy and vaccines. And these investments are a cornerstone of the recovery programs in Germany. And of course, cooperation within Europe is an important aspect of all these fields. For us, it's clear that unilateral national approaches will not bring success. On the one hand side, the market power of the EU is necessary to ensure fair access to global markets. Also for innovative ideas generated in the EU and for establishing worldwide, maybe generous standards. So in this respect, Germany will by itself not be able to provide global impetus on its own due to its relative small size compared to the economic and innovative scale of countries or regions like in Asia or America. So on the other hand side, Germany is, however, a key driver within the EU as a member state with the strongest economy and innovation power. So in our understanding and experience, European cooperation is particularly successful when it builds on strong structures and competences in the member states. So one by one, it again belongs together. So also we highlight the importance of European and global cooperation and solidarity. We also need to build our own structures and cooperations on national level.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Strong statement from a country like Germany, too small on the global scale. Jean-Eric, from a European perspective, what is the role for the EU compared to member states?
Well, I think investments and strategic investments are essentially happening at the national level, in national systems. If you look at research and innovation, 90% of public investment is done at national level. So this is where most of the choices are contemplated. And I think the EU level provides indeed the necessary measure of competition in the internal market, as Dr. Schieferdecker just rightly said. But I think the EU framework also provides the place where strategic discussions can and should take place between member states to ensure that indeed the investment has a degree of collective coordination. As Dr. Schieferdecker just said, I mean, even Germany in areas like quantum and artificial intelligence will not make a difference in isolation. And any of our member states, even the most well-equipped member states, will need a degree of cooperation at European level. And this is what is provided by European instruments. For industry, the alliances, I think, are from that point of view particularly powerful. Then, of course, Horizon Europe and partnerships will equally, I think, be helping member states to interact smartly. I think what member states need to do is to devise their own strengths and priorities, and then interact in this European framework to make it in synergy a collective strengths. This is essentially what the European research area and the internal market are about.
Thank you, thank you. I think we covered a lot of ground. What really matters is investment at all levels, starting with the national levels. Otherwise, we cannot achieve European technological sovereignty. At the same time, we need the internal market. We need competition. We need, however, to top this up with strategic coordination. Let's move to you, Pierre, from the industry perspective. Hand on heart, with your experience in leading global companies, would you hesitate to go on an Asian market if that, even if that risks losing protection of intellectual property rights or know-how?
Okay, so you are talking about technological sovereignty at the level of a company, basically. Well, Peter, clearly, I think a company would. I would certainly care, but the answer to your question is certainly not black and white. It really depends on the criticality of the IP that is at stake, whether or not this IP is really critical for the value of your business, either in terms of cost or product performance. So in some way, it's a little bit the same parallel as with a strategic technology at the level of European Union. So I have personally participated in several investments in China, which were designed to serve local markets, in business fields where we really had a technological hedge. And I can assure you that the factual risk of theft or transfer of know-how have always made us very careful and not including our latest proprietary technologies or taking extra measures to practically conceal the critical part of our technology. So especially when you are a technology leader in a well-differentiated field with few players, it's clear that, to me, jeopardizing your global position by losing potentially a technology leadership and IP control just for the sake of additional market share may not always be worth it, and you would think twice. But on the contrary, there are businesses where technologies are more mature, are more widely available. So in those cases, you would think that, look, anyway, if we don't do it, somebody else will do it. Or also the local innovation capabilities, if you talk about Asia, could certainly within time catch up with these technologies. So in those cases, taking the risk with respect to IP to gain market share would certainly be more acceptable, to answer your question. Now, I would also point a third case where it can seem contradictory, but you would even find it desirable to facilitate the spread of your technology. And I'm talking about the cases where spreading your technology would help setting your own standards. And for example, this is particularly true in the HSN health, safety, environment standpoint. If you can help setting your own standard in these fields, in a field where you feel strong already, it will accelerate the market uptake and it can help you ultimately. And I think we can make the same parallel also at the European Union level. So talking about strategic technology or not, and talking about technologies that will be for the well-being of the planet and where you would put your own standards.
Very clear, Pierre, and actually it resonates with what you said at the beginning, the balance between being independent, but also engaging internationally, and at the company level, that's the same. Sandrine, I saw you nodding, or would you like to react immediately on that before I come to the question, to a question to you?
Well, please, ask the question and I'll bring it all together.
Okay, so you gave us this morning, and by the way, we get more and more questions and comments from the audience with a lot of compliments to the opening speakers, to Sandrine, you, and Pierre, you as well. So I'm happy to convey these compliments to you. There was, you made, Sandrine, a plea for drastic action now, and so my question to you is, how does it fit together if we protect European technology to be sovereign with our intention to emerge from the climate emergency?
I think we absolutely need both. I mean, I actually want, so this is a perfect question, Peter, and then I'll reflect a little bit and bring in some of the others. I think the missing piece here is we're still speaking as if we're in the 20th century and not the 21st. We need to, as we look at the transformation, we need to transform research and innovation. We have to have a totally new radical approach to research and innovation. It's not by doing what we've been doing up until now that's going to get us out of the mess that we're in. So part of what I haven't heard is what is the research and innovation value chain that we need to focus on? And then how do we actually join up member states for a cohesive plan of action? Part of this is the mission spirit that the European Union has put forward through the Commission. But we haven't talked about education. We haven't talked, I mean, I'm now giving presentations in engineering schools where the engineers are telling me that they're still learning about theory of engineering rather than how do we actually engineer the transformation. That is what we need to do. Our educational programs and those that are going to be part of the radical transformation need to understand the complexities that are facing them and how they can do that. Then we need the skill set. If you speak to Sharon Burrows at ITUC, who's a good friend, we have conversations continuously about the unions. How do we transform the fossil fuel industry into a renewables industry? What are the skill sets that we need? What is the human dimension of that? How do we renovate, innovate within our industrial communities so that they are not industrial communities of the past and ghost towns, but actually thriving new communities? We haven't talked about the way in which local authorities are part of this transformation. The triangle of research has gone beyond just the discussion between the national policymaker, the business leader, and actually the academic. It is now much broader in terms of the stakeholder space that we need within that innovation. So I think there are elements that we haven't really discussed. Now, that is within a European thriving technological and non-technological innovation space. If we continue to show leadership at the level of Europe, which means, by the way, that we also, and I agree, border taxation may not be the way to move forward, but we have to integrate into our trade agreements. We have to ensure that our standards continue to be at the level that we are pushing in terms of our environmental and our human objectives. So that means, yes, integrating social and environmental criteria within our trade agreements. It means ensuring that we don't actually inherit the both social and environmental costs of the production from elsewhere as we bring in those products into Europe. So I think it's incredibly important that we think of a much more systemic and holistic approach to the way in which we look at research and innovation and unpack the tensions also as to why it hasn't worked in the past. How do we get the research community from moving away from just wanting to finance their research rather than understanding that their research has to be transformative? How do we get away from policymakers to continue the short-term cycles when we need to have them look at long-term investment cycles for a real transformative space? So I think we need to get much better at asking those key questions and then bringing forward some of those solutions. I fully believe that the Anthropocene can actually get away from anthropocentrism, which was very much pushed by this current Pope within the Laudato Si, into an ecocentrism that totally shifts the way in which we work together. And that brings in that second part of the sovereignty, which is the solidarity piece that I wanted to bring into this conversation, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you. Very insightful. It makes me think that when the United Nations developed the index for human well-being, the Gini index, this was about individual needs, because that, and Jean-Eric mentioned alleviating poverty, we need international cooperation for that. It was all about individual needs because that was urgent. Now we need to move the next step and think about the collective needs. And I understand you saying that, and I think that's also the right ambition for our sovereignty, European sovereignty in all fields, including technology. Is any one of the panelists wishing to intervene before I move to the questions we have received on the discussion so far? Okay, so we have a nice question here. The EU from our friends in Lithuania. The EU strategic value chains are likely to make a significant contribution to the transformation. I would like to know your insights about how small EU countries, especially in Eastern Europe, could be encouraged by practical actions to integrate into more sustainable, competitive, green, and resilient industrial value chains of the EU. Integration of smaller countries, Central and Eastern Europe, into value chains. Very, very good and very important question. Who would like? Jean-Eric, please.
Yeah, no, I think I should say a word on this, and hopefully colleagues can also contribute. I think the first thing to say is that if I look now more specifically at research and innovation, what we need is that all 27 member states play their part in coming forward with this collective European research and innovation agenda. The additionality and the added value comes from across all 27 national systems. So more investment and reforms are needed across all member states, including in this case also for Lithuania. This then allows public research organizations, universities, and economic and industrial actors from these member states to connect to the alliances, to connect to the partnerships. And in these alliances and partnerships, this is where the cooperation dimension, next to the internal market competition, energy or momentum, if you want, where this cooperation dimension can be best explored. We will, in Horizon Europe, pay particular attention to the openness of the partnerships. We would encourage all member states to look at the 49 partnerships in preparations, of which very many are partnerships prepared with industry. And we have also agreed at this stage, still to be formalized, but the agreement is there between Parliament and Council, that the EU instruments will be better connected with one another, and funding from regional policy instruments will be available for member states, if they so decide, to also fund the public part of their participation in partnerships. That is a big game changer from which I expect a much broader participation of all 27 member states in the key partnerships of Horizon Europe. So that's going to be, I think, a particularly powerful way forward. This applies to Horizon Europe and research and innovation, but I think you can make a similar argument for the industrial alliances as well. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you very much. Ina, would you like to complement?
For sure. So in addition to the European level, which we much support, we look ourselves into local research cooperation, so in bilateral, trilateral setups with our East European partners and beyond, so that we also strengthen the cooperation within Europe.
Thank you, Pierre, and we have to accelerate a bit. Keep to 1 minute max.
Yeah, I wanted to rebound on these questions because so we are the association private side of the partnerships that we are proposing. We are welcoming industry members, RTOs, academia for all over Europe. And it's true that we have a lower participation of these small countries, and Eastern countries. We really invite them to join, and I think it's very important to have them represented. So I don't know where the people putting the question was coming from, but if they are part of this industrial world or RTO or academia, don't hesitate. You can certainly join us and be involved in these innovation roadmap.
Thank you for this very clear and concrete offer. To all of you who follow this panel, please take up this offer and engage for our transition to sustainability. There's another nice question about the international positioning of the EU. How does EU policymaking in this area compare with the US or China?
Well, I mean, I don't know, Jean-Eric, if you want to respond. What I'm saying, I mean, I speak with an American accent, by the way, but I am French-Belgian. And having grown up in the States and grown up in California, you know, you could talk about Silicon Valley being the center, the epicenter of technological change. And there was a huge amount of innovation that went into this. And it is true that in that sense, this triangle that I was talking about, already the business community with the academic community and the policy community started working together very early on, already in the 70s and the 80s. But I want to say something. They totally missed a trick. We now have the highest levels of depression in California we've ever had. We have the highest levels of homelessness and the highest levels of drug abuse. You cannot tell me that all of that incredible innovation has serviced people. And I think that is the missing trick. So we can maybe be behind in terms of the incredible research budgets that are going on in China and the United States. But there's one thing that we haven't forgotten, and that is the people, planet, prosperity aspect, which, by the way, now research and innovation at the European level is being structured around. That is what's going to save us. It's not just about money. It's about optimization of the technologies that we have to service people and planet. Otherwise, we're all doomed. We can be competitive as the cows come home, but if in 10 years we have more COVID and other crises, what is it going to help if we're all stuck at home looking at ourselves in a screen? I really think it's important that we remember the reality of the situation and the complexity that is before us, and not get caught up in research budgets as the only way of demonstrating proper research. And the last point I'll make is, having worked in environmental standards and legal aspects for many years, systematically, Europe has the greatest environmental standards and also, in many cases, social standards that it propagates across the globe, that is picked up across the globe by other countries. So we should be proud of that.
Yeah, Peter, maybe I can add one sentence before I need to leave you, to say that, I mean, firstly, I think Sandrine's plea and comment I fully subscribe to. I would add that Europe is much more powerful or impactful. Let me say impactful. It's a word which probably I would prefer in science, research and innovation than we sometimes portray. I think some of the best science is done in Europe, in our universities or research infrastructure, in the European Research Council. And we are now also creating every year many more startups than anyone else in the world, more than in the US, more than in China. We are sometimes indeed challenged to scale up, and we are sometimes challenged on the financing side, but this also is now increasingly being addressed, notably with the European Innovation Council. But where I believe, as Sandrine, that moving forward there will be a major competitive advantage for Europe, is that the Green Deal as our growth strategy is allowing the needed transformations, which are unescapable. We will need to go worldwide through these two transformations. And this can be driven in part by private innovation interests, but it will require massive, efficient regulation and public investments. And that is where Europe, including with its engineering and industrial capacities connected to technology for good, I think is much better equipped with than anyone else. So yes, China is a powerhouse and science tables are turning. There will be the major player alongside the US and Europe from now on. But I have, frankly, no worries for Europe to be competitive and probably a leader in these transformations as we move forward. And the industry will spare that, no doubt about that.
Thank you very much. We need to come to the end of this panel. As much as I regret that, I would ask all panelists to give a shorter than Twitter, 2 sentences statement, your main takeaways from the discussion here. And Jean-Eric, you have to leave immediately, or can we start with?
Can I start? Can I start, Peter? Yeah, sorry to colleagues. Thanks a lot. I think Industry 5.0 will drive Europe's transformation. That's my Twitter. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Jean.
Thanks to everyone.
Thanks. Pierre?
Well, there are so many things to do. I think I would just mention, not a summary, but one point that we didn't say. We need in Europe to leverage much better our size and our power.
Thank you a lot. Sandrine?
There you go. Yeah. People, planet, and prosperity will drive innovation and transformation.
Thank you so much. Professor Schieferdecker, you have more time than that, if you wish. Your closing sentence for this panel.
I would also, thank you. I would also like to make it short but true. So I would like to repeat that we see technological sovereignty really as a central political goal and key prerequisite for well-being, competitiveness, and for solving societal challenges. And that's indeed the challenge for all science and research to address the societal challenges and the needs of society and planet. And that we can only achieve together by working together in Europe and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a perfect closing statement. Thanks a lot. And I wish us all continued good connections today and throughout the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Peter.
Bye-bye. Have a nice conference.
Bye-bye.